When people in town spoke about my grandmother, they lowered their voices without meaning to. They did not say she was cruel. They did not say she was wicked. They said smaller things, stranger things. They said she had outlived too many people. They said she knew when storms were coming before the sky changed. They said children should not linger by her gate after dark. They said the house on the hill had always been wrong, even before she lived there. I was too young to understand any of it when I first went to live with her. My parents died in the same winter, in the same week, and after that there was nowhere else for me to go. My grandmother arrived dressed entirely in black, smelling faintly of lavender and damp earth, and took my hand as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. I remember how cold her fingers felt. Not cold from weather, cold like metal left in shadow. Her house stood at the far edge of town, half hidden behind dead-looking trees that never seemed to bloom properly. It was taller than any house should have been, narrow and leaning slightly, as if it had spent years listening to something underground. The windows were old and uneven. The porch boards creaked before you stepped on them. Even in daylight, the place looked like evening had settled there permanently. Inside, everything smelled of dust, candle wax, and something older that I could never name. There were rules from the beginning. Do not go into the attic. Do not answer the back door after sunset. If you hear footsteps in the walls, go to sleep. If you hear your name whispered at night, keep your eyes shut. And most important of all, never open a door you do not remember seeing before. At the time, I thought all old people had strange rules. I learned quickly that my grandmothers were not meant to protect manners. They were meant to keep something in order. The house changed. That was the first thing I could never explain, even to myself. Not dramatically. Not like a nightmare where hallways stretch endlessly or staircases vanish. The changes were smaller, quieter, somehow worse. A door that used to open into the sewing room would one morning lead to a narrow linen closet. A window at the end of the upstairs hall would disappear for 3 days, then return with a different view. Sometimes I would count 14 steps from my bedroom to the bathroom. Other nights, there were 17. When I tried to tell my grandmother, she only smiled with one side of her mouth and said, "The house is old. Old things move when they are not watched." The nights were the worst. I began hearing people when I was 8. Not voices exactly, not at first. Sounds. The careful murmur of someone speaking in the next room. A chair dragging across a floorboard where no chair should have been. Slow steps in the hallway outside my bedroom, stopping right at my door and remaining there for so long that I would lie in bed shaking. My blanket pulled over my mouth so she, or it, would not hear me breathing. Sometimes the sounds came from inside the walls, sometimes from beneath the floor. One night I heard someone laughing softly under my bed. Not a child's laugh, a woman's. Dry, patient, almost fond. The next morning I told my grandmother there was someone in my room. She looked at me for a long moment over the rim of her teacup. Then she said, "If they wanted you, you would not be here asking me." After that, I stopped telling her everything. Instead, I began to write. The diary was a gift from a teacher at school, a plain brown notebook with cheap paper and a small brass clasp that did not really lock. I started using it because I was afraid of forgetting. Not just the sounds, but the details. The way the hallway wallpaper sometimes looked damp even when I touched it and found it dry. The way my grandmother would pause midway through washing dishes and whisper, "Not tonight," into the empty kitchen as if Someone had asked her a question. The way the house sometimes smelled suddenly of pond water and soil, strongest around the locked closet beneath the stairs. I wrote down everything. March 3rd, heard, knocking inside the wall beside my bed. 3 knocks, then 3 more. Grandmother pretended not to hear it. April 11th. The woman in the mirror behind grandmother was gone when I looked back. Grandmother said mirrors remember old guests. May 2nd. At dinner, grandmother said, "Children hear better because they still belong half to the dark." She laughed after, but I do not think it was a joke. I kept the diary hidden under a loose floorboard at first. Then, after my grandmother started entering my room when she thought I was asleep, I moved it twice more. Eventually, I found the safest place in the house by accident, a narrow cavity behind the back wall of my closet, hidden by a warped strip of wood that came loose in my hand one stormy afternoon. There was just enough space for the diary. When I slid it inside, I felt a strange certainty that I was not the first one to use that hiding place. As I grew older, the house grew stranger with me. My grandmother became less like an old woman and more like part of the structure itself. She slept less, ate little, wandered the halls after midnight without lighting a lamp, her feet always finding the boards that would not creak. Sometimes I would wake and see her shadow standing in my doorway, not entering, just watching me as if measuring something. She began saying things that made no sense until much later. The house likes children because they have not chosen themselves yet. There are rooms that grow only when they are fed. You must never tell a person in the walls your full name. They wear names out like gloves. I wrote those things down too. The year I turned 13, I found the locked closet under the stairs open. I had passed it every day for years and never once seen it unlocked. That morning, the door stood open only an inch. Darkness pressed behind it like folded cloth. I should have walked away. Instead, I knelt and looked through the crack. There were no coats, no shelves, just steps leading downward into blackness. I heard breathing rise from below. Not heavy breathing, not an animal. Human. Calm. As if someone was standing just at the bottom of the unseen stairs, waiting politely for me to decide. Then my grandmother's hand closed around the back of my neck so suddenly I bit my tongue. She did not shout. That would have frightened me less. She leaned close enough for her breath to touch my ear and whispered, "That door only opens for family." Then she closed it and locked it again. That night I wrote 3 pages in the diary and hid it deeper in the wall. After that, things accelerated. The sounds at night became words. Whispers moved through the house after midnight, sometimes just beyond my bedroom door, sometimes from the heating vents, sometimes from directly inside my pillow when I pressed my head down. I began hearing my grandmother answering them in the kitchen below, always in that same low, patient voice. "Yes. No, not yet. She hears too much. I know." Once, half awake, I heard her say, "Take me instead." The next morning, she had bruises around both wrists and would not let me touch her. School became difficult because I was always tired. I started writing in the diary during lessons too, not because I saw anything there, but because I was afraid the house would erase itself when I was away from it. I needed proof. Dates, details, evidence that I was not inventing it. Then one evening I came home and found my diary on my bed. The brass clasp was open. It was exactly where I had left it hidden in the wall. My hands shook so badly I could barely touch it. Nothing was torn out. Nothing marked. But between 2 pages, pressed flat like a dead insect, was a single yellowed strip of paper in my grandmother's handwriting. "You are old enough now to stop writing and start listening." I looked up and saw her standing in the hallway. She smiled. I had never seen her smile that widely before. That was when I decided I had to leave. Not immediately. Children in stories run at once. Real children wait because they have nowhere to run to and because fear makes planning feel safer than movement. I spent 2 weeks hiding clothes in a satchel and coins in my shoes. I wrote more than ever, filling the diary with everything I could remember in case I did not get out. I wrote about the changing hallways, the voices, the closet under the stairs, the rule about never opening a door you did not remember, the way my grandmother sometimes stood at the foot of my bed whispering, "Not much longer." I wrote one final entry the night before I meant to leave. There is another door in my closet now. I know it was not there before. Grandmother looked at it this morning and said, "Soon. If anyone finds this, do not trust the house. It learns you first." I hid the diary in the cavity behind the closet wall and pushed the wood strip back into place. I packed my satchel. I waited for the house to sleep. That is the last thing I remember clearly. Waiting in the dark, fully dressed, shoes on, listening to the silence between the whispers. Because sometime before dawn, someone knocked from inside my closet. 3 soft taps. Then my grandmother's voice from the other side of the door that hadn't existed the day before. "Come here, child. It's time." I did not scream. I did not answer. I only remember the closet door opening inward without sound. Blackness spilling into my room, and my grandmother standing inside it, smiling as if she had always belonged there. By morning, I was gone. The town said I ran away. My grandmother said little. She outlived another winter, then another. The house remained on the hill with its crooked windows and shifting rooms, waiting. And my diary stayed in the wall, waiting too. The Mercer family bought the house because it was cheap. That was how people explained it afterward, always with the same careful tone, as if low price alone could account for every bad decision. But cheap houses do not usually come with orchards gone wild in the backyard, wraparound porches, carved banisters, and enough rooms for a family trying to begin again. The house looked worn, yes, but beautiful in the way dying things can still seem beautiful from a distance. There were 4 of them, Andrew and Melissa Mercer, and their 2 children, Noah and Elsie. Noah was 11, quiet and serious. Elsie was 8 and still young enough to love an old house immediately, with none of the caution adults mistake for wisdom. The first few weeks felt ordinary. Melissa unpacked boxes and talked about repainting the kitchen, whereas Andrew fixed sticking windows and replaced loose boards on the porch. Noah explored every room like he was mapping a country no one else had seen. Elsie named the trees and made little homes for beetles near the back steps. At first, the house only seemed old. Then it began to feel attentive. Melissa noticed it first, though she said nothing. Doors left open would be closed when she returned. A chair in the upstairs hallway kept appearing at different angles, always facing the wall. Some mornings the children insisted a room had moved in the night. Not vanished, just changed. Noah said the bathroom was farther from his bedroom than it had been yesterday. Elsie claimed the guest room window used to face the road and now faced the orchard. Andrew laughed it off. Old houses settle, he said. But the house did not feel like it was settling. It felt like it was thinking. The secret door was found on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Melissa was still in town buying groceries. Andrew was at work. The children were supposed to be upstairs doing homework, but the weather had made the whole house dim and strange, and homework felt less important than exploration. Noah had emptied most of the master bedroom closet looking for old floor vents because he was certain he could hear whispering through one of the walls. Elsie was trying on Melissa's scarves and pretending to be a ghost bride. It was Noah who found the loose strip of wood at the back of the closet. He pulled it away by accident and exposed a narrow gap behind the wall. Elsie, delighted, pushed her small hand inside first and said she felt paper. A few minutes later, they were sitting cross-legged on the closet floor with the diary between them. It was older than they expected. The pages had gone soft at the edges. The handwriting shifted from neat to frantic and back again. Noah read the first entry aloud and then another and then another, the room growing darker around them as the rain thickened outside. At first they thought it was just a girl's old diary. Then they understood that the girl had lived in this house, that she had heard things, that she had written down rules. Do not answer whispers from inside the walls. Never open a door you don't remember. If grandmother says the house is hungry, stay out of the closets. Elsie wanted to stop reading there. Noah did not. Children are rarely sensible at the right moment. Fear can feel like importance, and importance is hard to turn away from. They kept reading. By the time Melissa came home, the diary was hidden again, and both children were unusually quiet. That night at dinner, Elsie asked whether there had ever been another little girl living in the house. Melissa said probably over many years. Noah asked if the house had always had a basement and a closet beneath the stairs. Andrew laughed and said, "As far as I know." After dinner, Melissa found both children standing in the upstairs hallway in front of the old wall mirror. They were smiling at it, not at their reflections, at the glass itself. "What are you two doing?" she asked. Elsie answered without looking away. "Listening." Melissa laughed nervously and sent them to bed. 3 nights later, Andrew woke to the sound of voices in the children's room. He assumed they were talking to each other after lights out. But when he opened the door, Noah and Elsie were both sitting upright in separate beds, eyes open, facing the corner. There was no one there. Noah said, "She likes it better when we stay awake." "Who does?" Andrew asked. Both children turned to look at him at the exact same moment. "The girl in the wall?" Elsie whispered. Melissa wanted to leave then, not because she believed in ghosts, not fully, but because children say odd things, and what frightened her was not the words. It was the tone, calm, matter of fact. As if they were discussing a neighbor who visited in the afternoons, Andrew insisted they were settling in badly. New house, too many scary stories, too much imagination. Then the children began to change. Noah, once quiet, started laughing to himself in empty rooms. Elsie began holding long conversations in the closet when she thought no one was watching. Sometimes Melissa would pass the bedroom and hear both children inside speaking in low voices, only to enter and find them alone, seated on the floor, with the closet door cracked open between them. At dinner, Noah began saying things that made no sense. Dad should not go into the orchard tomorrow. Mom shouldn't answer the back door after dark. We're not supposed to tell you what happens under the stairs. Melissa dropped a glass one evening when Elsie smiled at her over mashed potatoes and said, "Bad things only happen when the house gets impatient." Andrew finally searched the children's room and found the diary on the third Sunday. He read it in secret after everyone was asleep. By dawn, he looked 10 years older. Melissa found him at the kitchen table with the diary open and his coffee untouched. When she asked what was wrong, he only said, "We should have left when you first asked." But leaving a house is easy in theory and difficult in practice. There were finances, work, explanations, pride. They argued in whispers for 2 days while the children grew stranger by the hour. Noah stopped going to school after he punched another boy for saying the house was haunted. Elsie began drawing a woman in every notebook she owned. Black dress, long fingers, smile too wide. In some drawings, the woman stood inside a doorway hidden in a closet. In others, she stood behind the parents' bed while they slept. Then came the predictions. Melissa found Noah in the hall one morning, tracing circles on the wallpaper with one finger. "What are you doing?" she asked. He said, "Making the place where you'll stand when it happens." "When what happens?" He turned to her and smiled in a way that made her step back. "When the house takes all of us at once." That afternoon, Andrew nailed the master closet shut. The children screamed for nearly an hour. Not angry screams, grieving ones. Noah threw himself against the bedroom wall until his forehead bled. Elsie sobbed so hard she vomited on the hallway runner and kept crying afterward, hiccuping out the same phrase over and over. She can't get through. That night, every door in the upstairs hall opened and shut by itself. Melissa heard footsteps moving from room to room until almost dawn. When she opened her bedroom door, all 4 closet nails lay bent on the carpet. The door stood open. Beyond it was darkness deeper than the room could hold. The next morning, the children acted normal. That frightened Melissa more than anything else had. They ate breakfast quietly. Noah apologized for upsetting her. Elsie asked whether they could drive into town for ice cream. The house was still. The walls no longer whispered. Even the air felt lighter. Melissa almost convinced herself it had broken. But when Andrew came home from work that evening, the children were sitting together on the basement stairs, not playing, waiting. Noah looked up and said, "You're too late." Melissa ran to them. The basement looked ordinary at first. Concrete floor, hanging bulb, old shelves. But in the far wall, where no door had been before, a narrow doorway stood open. Inside was darkness, not shadow. Depth. Elsie smiled at her mother and said, "She found us." Andrew grabbed both children and pulled them upstairs while Melissa slammed the basement door shut. They dragged a dresser in front of it, then another. Melissa packed bags with shaking hands, and Andrew called the police, his voice breaking as he tried to explain that there was someone in the house and the children weren't acting right, and something had opened in the basement wall. The operator kept telling him to calm down. The police never arrived, or if they did, they were too late. Because sometime after midnight, while the family sat huddled together in the living room with every light in the house turned on, someone knocked from inside the walls. 3 taps, then 3 more. Then a soft woman's laugh traveled through the ceiling above them. The children stood at once. Melissa grabbed Elsie's wrist. Andrew held Noah so tightly, the boy cried out. But both children only smiled. "She says it's time," Noah whispered. The front door burst inward with no wind behind it. every light in the house went out. Melissa screamed. Andrew shouted for the children. And in the blackness, from somewhere close and pleased and impossibly old, came the voice of a little girl saying the same words written in the last pages of the diary, hidden in the wall for all those years. The house learns you first. By morning, the Mercer family was gone. No signs of struggle, no packed bags by the door, no car in the driveway. Just an empty house with 4 cups still on the living room table and a damp trail of small footprints leading from the master bedroom closet toward the basement stairs. The police searched the property, the orchard, the well, the woods. They found nothing. The house sat empty again after that, for a while. But houses like that are patient, and somewhere in the walls, behind warped wood and shifting rooms, the diary remained hidden, waiting for the next children curious enough to read it.